next speaker is Amanda Geary, and the title of Amanda's presentation is The Family Court System, a System of Shame and Secrecy. Amanda is a journalist, author and academic. She writes for publications in Australia and overseas, and she has a PhD in global investigative journalism. Amanda's reporting has led to Senate inquiries and legislative change. She has won many journalism awards, including a Walkley Award for a radio documentary in 2012. I have a strong feeling that IWD Brisbane Meanjin will be hearing a lot more from Amanda. Thank you.
We've done an acknowledgement to country, but I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we now stand and recognise that these have always been places of teaching and learning. We pay our respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and recognise the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people continue to play within our community. The presentation today will include some issues around domestic violence and child abuse, and if you need help to do with that, there are some numbers there: 1-800-RESPECT and Lifeline 13 11 14. The family law system was set up in 1974 with no-fault divorce. However, since then it has been very secret. There's Section 121 of the Family Law Act. I'll talk about that a little more shortly, but it prevents anybody who is in the court from even telling anyone that they're in the court. So it's very difficult for people to get help. There was one lady I met at the Brisbane Family Court just up the road here in November. She was very distressed because her husband had taken her children 12 months earlier to Tasmania and had refused to let her see them. There were no family court orders, and the family court would not order for the children to be brought back to her. I heard next from her family in February this year to say that she had committed suicide. So what we have here is the woman who's given birth to these children, who arguably has the strongest relationship on earth to those children, does not have the children through no fault of her own, and the authorities are not willing to give those children contact with her. Understandably, she lost her life over that. Now, I see so many similar and tragic cases that I think we all need to understand far more about the family court, and we need to understand that we don't know what is happening in there. If we knew what was happening in there, then we would all be absolutely horrified. And more than that, if roughly 50% of marriages break down, roughly 50% of children are at risk, and I would say at risk, of having judges make silly orders. When we look at statistics in the family court, 72% of applications filed in the family court are settled by consent. One of the things to know about consent is that the family court always assumes that the consent is true consent, not forced consent. So someone who doesn't have $400,000 to fight a case, take it to trial, etc., which is many, many women, are forced to make a consent to hand over children to someone who should not really be having any contact with them, and we'll give you some examples of that today. In 2012, Julia Gillard set up the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse. It was not a Royal Commission into child sexual abuse. It was only a Royal Commission into the institutional responses to reports. So what we don't have is what is really happening. So the amount of children who are abused in institutions is about 5% of the total. So as Peter Callaghan said at the very end of his investigation for 5 years, we've looked at 5% of the problem. The other 95% of the problem has not been addressed. So whilst the Royal Commission did a lot, it only looked at about 2% of the institutions that were even referred to it. So something like 400 institutions, 4,000 institutions were referred, and they did 60 case studies. So it was a very small representation of what's really happening out there. They made a 17-volume report, so it sits on my bookshelf and it's about this long. It's a huge amount of forest, and if you boil all of that down, what they've come away with from the point of view of institutional response is believe the children. So whenever they've looked into case studies when children have reported things many years ago, the children were disbelieved over any other adult, including perpetrators. But what the Royal Commission says, having looked at 8,000 cases, is believe the child over the Archbishop, believe the child over the priest, believe the child over the scoutmaster, believe the child over the parent, believe the child over whoever else is in the room. It's very simple instruction, really, for the safety of children is just believe the child. Now, what we see in the family court is exactly the opposite of that. Exactly the opposite. So what we can't know about what's happening in the family court is who is there and who they are. We can know what is happening. So if I was to wander down to the court, I could sit there and take some notes and I could write a story for a newspaper. And given the amount of stuff they have coming through and the amount of news stories where there are sources identified, and there's stories that might be gruesome but there are no people identified, they find it very difficult to write and publish an anonymous story over one where people are named. So although they can be written, they can't easily be published. So that is a lot of our problem. And the punishments are very severe. If someone names a person, like if someone walks out the door and says, I'm in the family court, my kids said their father sexually assaulted them, and his name is that and their names are that, it's a 2-year jail term. Who's going to do that? And it's the same for a journalist. So, parties can be de-identified, but media are reluctant to publish, as we've seen, because what I see most often when women come to me who are in crisis usually is, why did I not know about this hell which is the family court? And why did I not understand that they don't operate with community standards? So you will see, for example, if you go to a police station, you'll see domestic violence posters around, and there'll be fists and big words and don't do domestic violence, but nobody tells you, by the way, it's not a crime, and we don't care in the family court, even if the husband is threatening to kill them, is strangling the kids, or whatever he's doing to them, the family court will still hand them over. So they find that very traumatising. They also find it very difficult to give up on their children. The lady who wrote this presentation, actually, which I've taken over for her to do, I met her 10 years ago. Her child was 3 years old, disclosing sexual assault by the father. She has been in the family court for 10 years trying to protect her child. She has studied law as a cheaper option to get that knowledge rather than pay for a legal team. There are other women in a group I belong to where women have paid $650,000 or $700,000 for legal advice. Another one simply paid him for the children. She literally handed over $1 million for her children. And she's in rare company. There aren't many women who can buy their children back for $1 million. So we have a very serious problem. Let's have a look at this one case in a little detail. This is Jack and Jennifer. Their mother was a long way down a line of women conquests of the father. I think there were at least 5 other women before her. And when this woman left him, he decided that he didn't believe that she should have the children, and if he couldn't have the children, they couldn't live. So he happened to get a train timetable that Jennifer had. I don't know how he got that, but he managed to find out the train timetable, work out when she would be coming home, followed her from the station to their house, walked in the door with a gun. The children were both there. They both hid under Jack's desk, and he shot them dead, both dead, under the desk. Now, you might think, well, 2018, was that a surprise? Was that a surprise? Absolutely not. These types of murders are the most predictable types of murders that there are. The most predictable homicides, and yet our system is not detecting them and is not protecting people from them. They're fine to come and say, oh, here are some dead bodies, let's solve the crime. Well, in this case, the father shot him and killed himself. I don't know by what method. I'll come to that. This is Olga. She is a solicitor, right? She's not stupid. She's not stupid. She's highly trained, tertiary qualified woman. She was duped by a man who love-bombed her, got her pregnant, and was a very violent and nasty person. She realised that he was dangerous too late. There's a file note from her GP that she was in extreme distress. After her children died, she committed suicide. Okay, so in the mix here, the family court appoints what they call an independent children's lawyer, an ICL. Now, the ICL's role is not to be a lawyer for the children. It is not to listen to the children like any other client of any other lawyer. In fact, in Queensland, the ICLs rarely, if ever, see the children or even speak to the children. What they do is they look at the documents in the case, and they try to work out from the documents in the case what they think the court should do. So in effect, they're spending more time on the case than the judge does, and then they go along to the court and they say, well, judge, I've looked at this and I've looked at that, and I think the children's best interest is served by whatever. The problem that we have with that is that when you have a woman who is a victim of domestic violence and you have a perpetrator of domestic violence, the ICL is more than likely to be scared of the perpetrator of domestic violence, because that lawyer will know that this guy has already strangled her, poisoned her, shot at her, whatever. Now, they don't want to be in that type of gun, and whatever he says in many of the cases I've seen is just do what the bully wants, because she can't put up any fight, really. And so what we end up with is often ICLs representing the best interests of the perpetrator rather than the children, even though that's what their job is. Then we get to the nasty in that case. I can't stand even looking at this man's face. He's a financial planner, 67, long history of abusive behaviour. He picked up 2 guns from the pistol club. He uses a hire car, so his children don't even recognise him when he comes to kill them. They're found under the desk. The teachers at the inquest say he was very angry and aggressive. He shoots himself, leaving a suicide note, blaming Olga. Of course, it's all Olga's fault. And he leaves a t-shirt on the bed with the words on the t-shirt, "World's Greatest Daddy." Now, in any man's language, a man who shoots his children in cold blood when they're looking at him and hiding under a desk is not the world's greatest daddy. So he's a sadly deluded character. However, it's not all about him. Everybody knew about him for years, for at least 7 years. The authorities were alerted there is domestic violence here. There's an angry man here. The children are scared of him. The boy would sleep with a cricket bat. So all the authorities knew he was a dangerous person. What we also know from research is that if there is coercive control, which there was, and if there is violence, which there was, and if there is a recent separation, you have a cluster of risk factors, which mean that the woman and children in that family had a 900% increased risk of homicide. Yet nobody did anything, and the children are dead, and the mother then dies in grief. So it's a lot of failure in every direction. At the inquest, there were people making admissions. For example, the police, I'll just go through some of them. Edwards bashed up his wife on one occasion, and he was the first to go to the police station. This is the police officer who stuffed up, nearly swore. He went into the police station, I've heard this happen in many other cases, and he said to the police, "My wife is going to come in here and accuse me of domestic violence. It's not true, but she's going to make these allegations because she wants the house." Sure enough, Olga comes into the police station and says, "He bashed me up," which was true. And they said, yeah, we know what this is all about. Right, go on your way, love, it's okay. And they didn't even report a domestic violence. And what we find out later is that the Constable Cooper who made this report, saying it was a premeditated attempt to influence future family court decisions, should have actually been domestic violence attack, but they didn't. This is another case, rather than violence, this is a case of sexual assault which cost this little girl her life. So we have a situation where there is a pedophile. He is offending against other children, including his own children. Now, when the abuse of the child that was not his own child, he was prosecuted for that offence. But when it came to his own child, he filed a case in the family court. And when it's in the family court does not test any evidence until they get to trial, which might take 3 years. And therefore, the family court will order contact and for that child to spend time with that person. Eyes are opening. Spend time with him. Now, even if he was convicted, the family court would still require that she spend time with him. And that's because it doesn't matter what he does to his children. The child, according to the Family Law Act, has a right to a meaningful relationship, whatever that is, with both parents. Now, I don't have the power to change things, but if I did, I've spent a long time thinking about this stuff. If I did, I would say what we all believe and what we all know is that any child needs one safe parent. One safe parent is enough. If the other parent is abusive, the kid is better off without the abusive one and with the one who is safe and they are safe with. But that is not what the court says. The court says you've got to have two, even if one is a serial killer, a bomber, a pedophile, does not matter. So that's our problem. Let's just go through this one. So how big is this problem? Following Abby's story, which was put out by Bravehearts, they did, so the mother in this case, Gil Hammersley, so we can talk about them once they're dead, but you can't talk about when they're alive. So because we can now identify them, this woman went running marathons. She ran 7 marathons in 7 days to raise awareness of what happened to her little daughter. I'm not sure it actually made any change, but I think she got sore feet out of it. But certainly Bravehearts had calls from at least 200 families where similar stuff was happening. And you might say, why does our system not protect the children? And it goes back through a lot of history with the family court, but it's also a systemic problem. So what is happening is at the moment is the children's voices are not heard. Police will often not do anything at all unless there are bruises, broken bones, or the father's DNA on or in the child where it shouldn't be. They must have that degree of evidence. And oftentimes mothers are aware that something is going on, or a child says that something's going on, and you don't have that level of physical injury or forensic evidence. Now, from my point of view, as a mother who's raised 4 kids, from the time they're born, you're on high alert for all danger to the child. Is the child going to slip on a slippery floor? Is the child going to touch the hot oven? Is the child going to fall over the railing? Is the child going to prick its fingers on the rose bush? You are always alert to the danger. And you don't say, now just go into that danger and let's see what's going to happen. You would be a completely irresponsible mother if you did. But what the family court says is, just send them along. They should be okay. But what we know from the women who leave these men is that often they know about sexual assault. So we do have some problems here. So police and child safety have twin problems. There's a case of a woman who was being subjected to domestic violence in New South Wales. Victim Services paid for her to come up to Queensland to be safe. She wanted a DVO in Queensland. She went to the police assuming, well, that'll be easy. We've got one in New South Wales. They've moved me here. I want one here. And the police said, no. So she said, Amanda, why aren't they giving me one? So I actually phoned this copper up and I said, why can you not give this woman a DVO when she's got one in New South Wales? He said, well, unless he comes up here and we see blood and broken bones in Queensland, we will not give her a DVO. Now that is how stupid the system is. It is not rational, it's not logical, it's not safe. So these are the problems. We also have professionals, teachers and schools, more often principals, who will like to follow court orders. They will not protect the children as a priority. So they might see a child clinging onto the teacher's leg and not wanting to go to daddy, and they will be so keen to follow orders that they will have another teacher who will drag that child off that teacher's leg, screaming and crying, and hand it over to someone that child is terrified of. I think that's absolutely wrong. I think some questions need to be asked. I think that child needs to be brought into a soft room, interviewed. What is going on? Why are you scared? What is happening? Ask a few questions. And I don't think they should be made to do the court's bidding of hand a kid over to someone that they're terrified of being with. So where to from here? This is a difficult one. The family court is so overwhelmed. There's a group of women where I audit their progress through the family court. There's over 60 of them. We did a little survey of how long they've been in the family court. The average time is 8.9 years. The highest is 18 years. Now, I would say, because there is a very big difference between men's agency in the family court and women's agency in the family court, that it should probably be a free service. Because once, let's say the family only has a house or half a house by the time the relationship breaks down, by the time you pay that amount of money in legal fees, you've burnt all your assets. Both partners are left with no assets. Often she has not been working for some time because she's been looking after the kids, and therefore she's not necessarily work ready. She doesn't have a way of paying for legal advice. He's got a job, no problem with his career, right? So there's a very obvious imbalance there. How is she going to protect her kids? And it's not easy. We do have some happy stories where there are very high agency women who will throw everything at it. One of them spent 700 grand fighting for her kids, all the way to the High Court. So there are a few, but what I'm looking at is the great numbers of women and children who are subjected to domestic violence. And what I mostly find is that the women only leave when they've survived a murder attempt. They think they have to stay there because they think they have to protect the children. And they don't want to leave the children. They know he would get the children if they go to court. So she stays there. She risks her life to protect her children until he tries to kill her. And then she realises, actually, if I'm dead, I can't protect them, so I better get out of here. So she gets out of there, usually with the kids, but the court then says, oh no you don't, sweetheart, hand those kids back. So that's exactly the problem we have at the moment. So what should our priority be? I would say the safety of the child needs to be moved from the bottom of the pile to the top of the pile. I would say that we need to give our children freedom of association. At the moment, there are children that I have interviewed who have just been beyond terrified, crying, howling, absolutely beyond it at the thought of having to go to a person that they are scared of. I don't think that's good for anybody. There is some good news. Do you want the good news? There's been quite a move to make non-physical forms of domestic violence a crime in this country. In the UK, coercive control was criminalised in 2015, and of all the people who are charged, more than 99% of them are male, 91% are convicted, 75% go to jail for up to 4 years. So we are talking about non-physical coercion and control being a crime. At the moment, it's not. So domestic violence is not a crime. So what has to happen if you are being subjected to domestic violence? You have to go to a court and say, please judge, I don't like what he's doing. And the judge says, please don't do that. And even if he does it again, it's still not a crime against her. It's a crime against breaking the judge's order. It's a breach of a court order. It's still not a crime against her. There is a major study just released from the UK looking at 372 completed intimate partner homicides, so 372 dead people, and they've looked at what led up to that, and they found that in every single case there was coercive control. There was not always physical abuse. In a third of those cases, so more than 100 of those cases, There was no physical assault until the murder. So physical assault, which is what police look for, blood and broken bones, is not the best indicator. And that is why the police are failing to protect people. And that I think needs to be changed as quick as we can do it. Thank you.